We interrupt this program for a special news bulletin.
Throws toward the corner of the end zone. It is intercepted! Intercepted! The Ducks have the ball!
To the end zone! Touchdown, Oregon! Mariota dives! Touchdown! They hand it off straight out! C.J. Burdell wins the game for Oregon!
Inside the 10! A hat-trick, a touchdown from Justin Herbert! Howard's going to run for it. Time runs out, and that'll do it! Welcome to the Big Ten, Oregon! They storm the field at Autzen!
Welcome, Duck fans, to another episode of the Ducks Rising Alumni Corner on the Ducks Rising Podcast Network. I am your host, Travis Rooke-Ley. Just a reminder that this podcast is sponsored by Backer, and we encourage all Duck fans to check out their amazing Oregon jackets, hoodies, hats, and more at Backer, that's BCKR.com. Use the code RISINGFREE for free expedited shipping, and also 10% of your orders will go back to Ducks Rising as well. Joined today on the podcast by my co-host, Zachary Neel. Zach, how's it going?
Good, man. Looking forward to this interview today.
100%. Most importantly, we are excited to be joined by former Oregon defensive back Walter Thurmond. Walter, grateful to have you here.
Yeah, appreciate it being on. How you guys doing?
Pretty good. What you up to these days?
Well, right now, I'm getting in the process of coaching. So I'm helping out some defensive backs at West Virginia High School, my former high school here. Training camp's kind of been underway and just getting ready for this first game here in a couple of weeks. So took some time to get back into the football coaching. I've been coaching golf since 2020, and then kind of transitioned to girls flag football and then softball this past season, and I finally got roped in to coach football. So yeah, I
love it. So you mentioned West Covina High School, obviously, where you originally were. Talk about your journey to Oregon, like what your recruitment is like, and ultimately how you made that decision to, be up in Eugene.
Yeah, for me, it was looking for a school where I was going to still have the opportunity to run track. Obviously, it was looking for a football scholarship, but I also still wanted to run track. San Diego State was actually a school that was on the radar, just close proximity. On top of that, too, was also an opportunity to looking at a school that gave me the opportunity to compete for a starting job earlier in my career. So San Diego State was one of those schools, but they didn't have track; they only had club track. Then I got an offer from the University of Oregon and came up there. Obviously, the track school and program is what it is there, and kind of seeing the depth chart of some of the seniors that we had in line there, and kind of. Had an opportunity to be able to compete for an early, starting position. Kind of came up here on a recruiting trip. It was a packed house. I think Jonathan Stewart was on that trip. It was 15, 20 guys that were on that trip. A lot of guys committed during that weekend, and it was just a nice sense of family orientation, I guess you can say, from the coaching staff. Very familiar with some of the players that were there as well. And just kind of felt like that was like the right place to be, through the next phase of my journey.
Travis, I've got to ask, sorry, what is Jonathan Stewart like on a recruiting trip? How is he as a host?
Well, he wasn't even the host. He was being recruited too. Yeah, he was being recruited.
Oh, my
so
bad.
We all came together. We all came in that that 04, 05 class. And you see this guy, number one running back in the nation during that time, and. It was a lot of guys that were prominent, a lot of guys from Southern California that were up on the trip, so kind of knew some guys from the track circuit, football, playing in some capacity, and so again it was just very familiar. It was very comfortable. It was it was dead winter. It was like December, January was the recruiting trip, so being from Southern California and kind of getting used to that didn't sway us at all, and it was kind of like it was very welcoming and. Was grateful for the opportunity.
Obviously, growing up down in Southern California, I don't know how much time or experience you had going to like other environments, but what was like that first visit or first times at Autzen like?
I didn't watch a lot of college football in high school, and so like the Pac-10 or Mountain West, wasn't really caught up into that situation. It was just kind of an opportunity to be able to continue to play. College football and to be able to run track. And the first game that a college game I went to was the San Diego State game. It was on a recruiting trip. And so I think even then I didn't I guess given the time of the visit, didn't even go to an Oregon game. So it was just kind of, just to visit, during that weekend that we were there, and that was kind of the experience. But then coming in, freshman year and getting a hold of all things like, oh, this is nuts, kind of like the atmosphere, the fan base, how engaged everyone is. It was something special and very unique. Not the largest stadium, but compared to some of the SEC schools that are touting 80 to 100,000. You're like, oh, this is loud, but like for the bases where it was at 45 to 50, it was like, oh, this is kind of ridiculous on how loud it can get in the stadium with half the number of people that some of these other schools may have in that capacity. And so I've always loved my time playing at Oregon. Just that home field advantage. And yeah, it's just been a great experience.
You were at Oregon through the transition from Bellotti to Chip Kelly and kind of experienced that, massive chain of events in Oregon history. What was that like being there as a player and kind of from your perspective?
Yeah, it was very unique just being able to be a part of changing and building a culture. And a culture that's kind of, continuing on now to this day. It was the 2007 season, going on until my sophomore year, and there was kind of a coming together, if you will, in that off season of reshaping that program, and guys really committing to the situation of not being individuals and coming together. The trip to Jaquan and during that summer, it really just kind of set the foundation of what the program was going to become, and getting away from the mentality of just being satisfied with just going to bowl games and really trying to compete, at the national level. And we have in the personnel, and Dennis Dixon coming into his own as helming the offensive side of the ball, and John Stewart. I mean, we had so much firepower, on that offense during those years. A lot of people, and then we got blistered by all these injuries because we just put the new training facility in too. And I like to think that was like kind of like you have this multi-million-dollar facility and had to be used, had to be occupied at some capacity. And so, we had like 4 or 5 ACLs that year, a couple broke legs from starters. It was just kind of just a crazy chain of events to where, we were number 2 in the nation, having the opportunity to compete for, national championship, and then just got hit with all its injuries. And so, kind of going from there, that continued to be some of the early bricks that were laid for the foundation. And then guys coming into like our junior year, into my senior year, and just making things more mandatory. And like, this is the goal. This is the nature that we need to have to where we're competing for national championships. And then in that 2009-2010 season, they go to national championship against Auburn. And so then that from there, just kind of just continue to move that trajectory moving forward though. So it's always just, great and honor to be able to be a part of that transition. Even my senior year when Chip did come on board, didn't really change too much of what was coming on from the Bellotti era. I mean, I think he was still kind of getting his feet wet and stuff like that. But then as he's got into his own recruiting class and really start to implement, his ideals within that situation, it just set the standard of what Oregon football is. And what's becoming to where, like, it is, our goal is to compete for a national championship. We've been close, but it's still kind of continuing to lay those bricks. And it's been just great to be a part of that transition of being a part of, reinventing the culture of Oregon football.
So Zach and I were actually just talking with Jerry Allen and talk about some of that, just kind of the evolution and getting here to the point where the expectation has changed so much. How much, pride and kind of like honor does your group and you specifically take from, I think, being one of the integral classes to like building the foundation of where we're at today? I mean, do you guys take pride in seeing what the program has become and all, all the work you guys put into getting there?
Yeah, for sure. You take pride in it. It's just like, you always have to pay it forward. And we have to look at the guys, the Joe Harringtons and, these other classes that came in and put Oregon on a national map in the early 2000s, from their kind of performances, and, got to benefit a little bit of, of the recent locker room. And then, they paid for it in the new training facility. And then, you go on and continue to build and develop the foundation. And now the facility is where it's at today. maybe you didn't get to partake in that, but you got to help, move things forward within that situation. So, the biggest thing is just, always appreciating, the work that you put in and being able to lay that foundation. But it's also great just to have pride in knowing that these teams and they're embracing the culture, they're embracing the standard that's been set. And, the goal is always, the pursuit is the national championship, right? And it's, that's kind of the mentality now, especially with how the divisions are lining up in the playoff circuit and things of that nature. And so, it's always trying to, encourage those guys. And I think they know what the standard is, right? I mean, it gets spoke about every year. And I think being up in the Pacific Northwest, we've gotten overlooked for, decades, being up there. And so it's great to see it on the national scale. And, now it's just a matter of just getting outside of everyone's like, oh, it's Nike U within that capacity. And, everyone, first thing that everyone talks about is like, oh, you guys don't have any national championships. And we've been to a couple of national championship games, so we let a couple slip away from our fingers. But it's just a testament to, the recruiting that's been able to be done, being able to showcase what the Pacific Northwest is and what Oregon is as a state and as a city of Eugene.
One thing that Dan has done a really good job of since taking over is kind of keeping that culture, not only for current players on his roster, but bringing back past guys too, mm-hmm. and keeping the alumni base really intact with the program. As a former, integral player to this team, what does that mean for you to have a coach who really wants you to be a part of what he's still building and still wants you around the program?
Yeah, it kind of had a little lull there, to where they weren't wanting some of the alumni there, which is kind of just a crazy thought to think about, of someone running a program to where you don't want your past players to be involved in the future and what's going on, especially, groups of guys that have helped, change the culture and create a particular type of standard. And it is great that he welcomes the alumni to come back, because it just shows, just the nature and the care and, to where you're also able to use it as a recruiting tool, right? Here are the guys that are coming back and, staying and living in and around Eugene, and coming back and giving back to the program. And it just shows the family orientation. It's just not taught. And I think a lot of, some coaches use this family dynamic as just talk, but then when you really get back to it, it's like, well, we're not bringing none of the alumni back, but you're talking about this family culture and everything. So now you're just not honest in your words and your recruitment, and now you're just lying to these kids. You're just lying to these families to just try to steal a kid from another school with no really intention to, really build up the community of the university, but then also the local community and these fan bases and people. So we've had a lot of coaches that were just, here just using Oregon as a stepping stone. And it's just great to see Dan, really, sinking his roots, within the university and in Eugene area, and really trying to build and get that national championships. I mean, I think you're at this level too, to where it's like, well, everything's kind of a lateral move now, right? If he's going to go to an Alabama or if he's going to go to Texas or whatever, it's just a lateral move. I mean, you're still recruiting the same guy that you were recruiting here. Right. And so unless you're trying to go to the NFL, then that'd be a different type of, situation of trying to present yourself. But I think, Oregon has become a staple and a power 5 school within that situation, to where, you can get any recruit to come here. Right. I mean, there is that lure. You're playing in one of the best conferences in college football. You're always competing for a national championship. And so it's just the opportunity of what's going on, and I appreciate what Dan has been able to do to engage that alumni base to keep guys here to help with.
Nice. So I got to ask you about this 2009 season. So obviously started off with Chip and the Boise State game with the punch. I'm sure many of us remember. Then I think I remember right a couple weeks later you tore your ACL.
Yep, Cal game.
Against Cal. And then obviously that season ended with, crazy Civil War game, and, making it to the Rose Bowl. How do you think about that season? Like, what stands out from that year? Obviously crazy times for you personally, but one that stands out to a lot of Oregon fans too.
Yeah, it's funny because I actually just showed my daughters that the kickoff return from that game of me tearing my knee. So it's kind of funny because that was actually literally yesterday. I showed them that video. But yeah, going into that season though, being captain and having TJ Ward and Some of the other guys that were there as well, kind of helming that ship, and again making those summer workouts, mandatory. And there was some pushback for some guys, but a lot of guys really embraced it, because again the goal was, trying to create that mindset of like, hey, we have an opportunity to be able to compete for a national championship, and that was kind of the mentality kind of going into that, of really laying that down. And it was great to see, obviously the Boise State game got away from us. I think we were prepared, but we didn't execute how we should have executed in that game, and we let one slip away. I think an early season loss is not the end of the world, because you could always bounce back and still kind of get to that pursuit of a national championship in that capacity. And yeah, going into that fourth game against Cal, kind of tearing the knee and jogging off after 3 of the 4 ligaments are blown out of my knee, but not even knowing that was the case. And so, but just seeing the guys being able to step up and come in there, and then we just had a very dominant, convincing win against Cal there. Just seeing the new leaders emerge within the team and taking ownership of that position now. And, it was great to see, going to the Rose Bowl and playing in that game against Ohio State there. And again, unfortunately we weren't able to pull it off. But again, you kind of seeing the making of what that team was to be, and then seeing I think the most proud of just seeing the younger guys carry what that season was into that next year, and then going to the national championship. And again, it was, was proud of that situation, seeing those guys take ownership and really push it forward within that capacity. And again, we were just, just right there of being able to pull that out. And again, just things happen, it just doesn't come down to just one play. But again, just to see the dynamic of going from, 2006, 2007, and just seeing the changing of the culture, getting there. We got to the national championship within that particular space. And then, a handful of years later, they go back with, Marcus takes us to the national championship again. And, that just became, started to become the standard, even though we fell short in those, but to show that Oregon can compete with the best of the schools in the country. There's not the talk of, we're small up front and things that nature. Like, we could have had our first national championship game, national champion, in that Auburn game, and we're playing with the SEC team, and we're not getting thrown around, and we're being stout up at the line of scrimmage. So I think that changed the narrative of what type of football Oregon can play, and us being in that national presence.
Fast forward to now, I'm just curious, what type of fan are you? I mean, how close are you able to watch this team? Are you someone who checks in a few times throughout the year? Do you watch game to game? Are you really in tune with what's going on with this team? How do you view this team going into 2025?
Yeah, it's a rebound. The landscape of football is so interesting, because you have this portal where guys are coming in and popping out, and so it is becoming a harder challenge for teams, just in general, to maintain the team from the previous year. And obviously, when you let go of a quarterback, someone that's fifth year guy that had a lot of football with Dylan Gabriel there, and now you're coming into a guy that hasn't had the most snaps, but is an experienced type of individual. You look at the other pieces around the team that's going to make us, make it a solid team. And I think the defense is going to be, very solid. And I think that's going to be something to where we would have to, control some things from the defense side of the ball. I think offense is I think the running game is going to be very solid as well. Our schedule looks very favorable, within that situation, or how it just kind of plays out this year. And so I think we can go make a run, in the Big Ten, and it's just, not letting a game, sneak up on us and overlook an opponent. And I think that the mentality just comes back down to that, because, guys are, schools are getting solid players, that can fall underneath the wayside. Everyone looks at the 4 and 5 star guys, but I think, those 3-star guys that, are hungry and have chips on their shoulders. And that's kind of where Oregon kind of, build some of the foundation, was having those guys that, one, had something to prove, and really compete at a high level. And those are teams that you got to watch out for. You just can't overlook opponents.
How much do you, you mentioned, like, obviously the changing era, NIL, all this different stuff, transfer portal. How do you guys, and you as a former player, like think about that now? Is part of you like, man, I got to imagine there's a little sense of I wish I was playing today. But how do you guys like think through all the changes that happen, and just like the crazy world that college football has become?
I'm happy for the guys to be able to monetize in that situation. Yeah, for sure, it would have been nice, to be able to participate in that. But everything happens for a reason, though, right? Because there's still going to be its pros and cons within that situation. The thing that I don't care for is the lack of accountability, I guess, that comes with it, right? And it's the sense of entitlement that I should be getting this because I'm here, as opposed to working and owning that situation to be able to warrant that price point that it may be, right? You have kids that are like, I should be worth this, but then they're not playing to that type of capacity. So, I don't get what I'm wanting here. I'm not starting. I'm going to go over here. Well, it's like, that doesn't mean you're going to go start over here either, right? So the lack of confidence and lack of competition and this sense of, I'm getting paid this, so I should be doing this is, I think that's a tough space to kind of navigate, right? Because now you don't have a player that may be truly loyal to your program, because if it's not going their way, they're going to look to go jump ship, or they're going to quit their job and they're going to let their teams down. So I think it's a tough space to kind of navigate now from a coaching standpoint, because you do have money involved, and these are like 1-year contracts. It's not like it's the NFL to where guys are up for 3 years or 4 years, and you have some guys that are on single contracts as well, right? But I think overall, guys can get very fickle and want to jump ship if things aren't going their way. It could have been a very solvable problem if the NCAA, would have jumped in and said, hey, here's $3,000 to $5,000 on top of your stipend a month. We wouldn't even be talking about this, and it'd have been, college football, college sports like we've known it to be within that capacity. But, you have to live and learn, and you have to live with the choices or non-choices that you make within that situation, and the Wild West happens. So, but yeah, I think I think it's great for them. Hopefully, a lot of them are learning through this course of money management and these things, and that's within that situation. But like I said, for me, it's more the integrity of the player it's been in question for me within this NIL space.
Going back to last year, I'm curious how you kind of look at the year as a whole. Obviously, an incredibly successful season. You got a 13-0 record. The ending of the year kind of put a damper on, put a bad taste in some fans' mouth. But that doesn't take away from the fact that it was still an incredible year, win the Big Ten in your first year there. You as a former player, how do you view that? If you were on that team, how would you view that if you were a player? Like, what's your kind of sense of that year overall?
Yeah, it's. Again, because the goal is to go to a national championship, right? And you kind of fall short on that, and it's tough because you're looking at Chip, being the coach over there, and it's like you won the first game, and it's always tough to beat an opponent twice, right? Because you're learning from your weaknesses. Obviously, we played them so earlier on in the season to where that team had evolved. Through the course of the year, with Jeremiah Smith kind of coming into his own, it wasn't the same player from that first game to that second game. And so at some point you have to understand that, everyone's talking about what type of receiver this player is and, needing to make those necessary adjustments, during that game. And that's kind of where it kind of came back. It's always tough, too, to have that, a team is playing the week prior and now you're having to sit to get back. So now you're kind of, a week or two off of playing, so that there's a lot of stuff that kind of goes into that situation. You kind of see in the NFL too, those teams that those first round teams that they don't have that wild card week game and they come back sluggish. It's no different there too. So it's just a uphill battle when you're not having to play those games and you're sitting back watching everyone play. So I think something to learn from, right? I think, moving forward of how to be able to handle and manage that situation. Obviously, it would have been, from a player standpoint, it would have been tough to going back to, playing Ohio State and losing to them, knowing that you had beat them earlier in the season, but then you also, it's a new game, it's literally a new year too within that. And so, yeah, I think you just kind of learn from that as far as some of the younger players that are coming into this season. If that situation presented itself again, now you know how to be able to handle it. Yeah, I mean, again, you just gotta kind of move forward, from that.
Love it. Well, Walter, we've got some quick hitters for you, which I know are always some fan favorites. So I'm going to hit you with 5 or 6, and then we'll get you out of here. All right. Top of mind for a lot of Oregon fans are always the uniforms. What's the favorite uniform you ever wore in your time at Oregon?
Favorite uniform. I love the all white uniforms. Unfortunately, I had to end my career wearing it, but the throwback uniform was my favorite going into that situation. So I'll take those 2. Yeah, I love this that yellow, that green combination, that UO look too. You got it on your shirt there. I love that logo there. So on the jacket, yep.
Nice. Do you remember the most hyped locker room you guys ever had post game?
The most hyped locker room. Anytime you beat Oregon State, those games are always big. Especially on the road.
Yep, love that. What's the best player you ever had to play against or cover?
Play against in college. Deshaun Jackson. He's always a tough cover. A lot of speed. Very good route runner. You always have to play some good technique going against him, for sure.
What about NFL? Sorry, Travis, to jump in.
Oh, in NFL, I always love it. Larry Fitzgerald. Doug Baldwin, I didn't get the opportunity to play against him in a game, but just from battling him, in practice, one of the best route runners in the game for sure.
What was the loudest stadium you ever played in beyond Autzen?
The loudest stadium? I don't know if it was the loudest. Non college football only. But one of my favorite stadium to play in was probably playing down in Arizona. And I think just the fan base down there is kind of like, they're the bottom of Arizona, and it's just kind of like, you against the world down there. Like, they don't care, what you're ranked going in that stadium. It's loud. Fresno State too is vicious environment. Fans are pretty, cutthroat there.
I know you were hurt, but I assume you were with the team, the 2009 game down there, the crazy game in the zoo.
Yeah.
That was the one I saw the highlights from the other day, and I forgot how all their students were just on the field at the end of the game.
Yeah, it's wild.
Ready to rush.
Yeah.
All right. Is there a coach or teammate who had a lasting impact on your life beyond football?
I have a lot of from Oregon specifically.
Whatever.
Or just, I have a lot of coaches that have been impactful through the course. Learning, John Neal sticks out. His approach was, looking to, build us up and help us create us as young men, as opposed to just football players. That was one unique coaching style that always stuck out to me. Jimmy Radcliffe, great, strength and conditioning coach. World-renowned strength and conditioning coach, and his mentality was just can't be in the vocabulary. There's always a way to be able to do something. If you're injured, if you're not, that's someone that's always stuck out to me within that situation as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Last one. I know for me, this is the 2008 pick 6 at Oregon State at the end of the first half, but I'll ask it of you. Which game or play still stands out in your head like it was yesterday?
That play sticks out. My former high school coach, who I'm coaching with now, at West Covina, he went to Oregon State, so we always go back and forth between Oregon State. And was just talking about my field goal block against Oregon State in Autzen. That one sticks out. He's like, "Oh, you were offsides. You were offsides." But we were just kind of going back and forth. That one sticks out, even though we lost the game in overtime, unfortunately, on a fly sweep to Jacquez Rogers, for the end zone, hurt. But yeah, that one sticks out because that was kind of like a, send the game to overtime type of play there, and it was just jump the snap and got the block. Almost blocked in my forearms there. It was really the aftermath of what Autzen was after that block. Just how electric it was. I never felt anything like that, from a game atmosphere. Yeah.
Love it. Well, hey, Walter, we'll end it right there. So grateful to you. Appreciate all the storytelling.
Yeah, for sure.
Fans tune in every week. We feel like this is a really special part of the podcast segment that we can offer. Appreciate everyone tuning in to Ducks Rising Alumni Corner. Just a reminder that this segment is part of the Ducks Rising Podcast Network. Encourage all listeners to check out ducksrising.com. You can support amazing content like this by subscribing to the Ducks Rising Podcast Network, rating our shows, and most importantly, becoming a member at Ducks Rising itself. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, go Ducks.
Thanks, Walt.
Yeah.